Hello, I'm Fergus Shanahan, and welcome to this series of presentations on the language of illness, a series of brief presentations covering topics that I address in my book of the same name, The Language of Illness, published by Liberties Press. Now, why the language of illness? Most of us, probably all of us at some stage, will feature in an illness story of a loved one, of a friend, of some form of acquaintance, or perhaps even ourselves. And the language we use may either accentuate or mitigate the suffering for the ill from that illness. For the one who is ill, they may feel they speak a language quite different to that of their doctor, their nurse, or other healthcare professional, and this is completely unnecessary. Words do far more than help us communicate from one to another. Words can inform, words can inspire, words may be therapeutic, they can transform, but sadly, words may heal, but they may also hurt, and this is completely unnecessary. In the course of this series of videos, we'll address several different aspects of the language of illness. Why do so many doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals take words for granted? Why do so many hospital managers and policymakers take words for granted? We will address this in this series of presentations. I will distinguish between disease and illness. Disease is the physical evidence that a doctor sees, evidence that there's a problem with the human body. Illness, on the other hand, is the lived experience of that disease. We use science to study disease, but science is not enough for illness. For illness, we need stories, patient stories, historical stories, even fictional stories. Where disease is black and white, illness is much more complex. It is coloured, nuanced, individual, and deeply personal. We will cover topics such as the distancing effect of medical speak or doctor speak, which is usually disease speak. These are words that may separate rather than connect doctors with their patients. We'll also cover words that can hurt as well as heal. We'll address the illness words that one never sees in textbooks of medicine. Words like hope, fear, suffering. When do doctors ever speak of suffering? Anger, loss, denial, and loneliness, and so on. We will address how language may corrupt logic. We shape our thoughts using language and words. And language directly influences our thinking, which in turn influences our judgment, our decisions, and our actions. And that's why language is so important in the decisions we make about illness. We'll look even at how words can turn people into patients, not always in the interests of their welfare, sometimes exploiting them for commercial purposes. We'll also look at the person versus the system. Increasingly, it's not a matter of a patient interacting with a doctor. Rather, it's a patient with a doctor interacting with the system. Patients are pulled and dragged by financial concerns, work absenteeism, a distorted sense of self, loss of social relationships, and with all that, they have to interact with an increasingly complex and bureaucratic system that at times can seem so uncaring. We'll address the language of the system. When every system comes under stress, such as in the setting of a plague or a pandemic, this introduces a public health emergency, also an economic emergency, and a leadership crisis, but it is most particularly a communications emergency, and we will look at the language of the most current pandemic, the COVID-19 crisis. Now let's begin with the topic of this introductory video presentation, namely, how does one behave with the ill? Why is it so awkward? Why do we feel so unfamiliar with this? Why are we so unprepared? And I'll list some do's and don'ts. Firstly, it begins with confronting our own awkwardness. Get over your uncomfortable feeling with this. Confront your awkwardness. Give patients your time. It's the most valuable thing you can give them. Don't feel you need to speak all the time. Silent presence is frequently sufficient. Be there, bear witness, and most importantly, listen. Don't be a minimizer. Don't try to reduce the illness. Don't say things like, it could be worse. Don't be a philosopher. Don't say things like, it's God's way or all things happen for a purpose. The ill do not need such idle chatter. Don't be a peddler of remedies. And don't be a storyteller. The ill do not need to hear someone else's story. They want to talk about their own story. That's it for this first short introductory session on the language of illness. Join me next time when I will address a different topic, and namely the distancing effect of doctor speak and disease speak in separating rather than connecting patients from their doctors. I'll see you then.